Once upon a time, there were 4 friends named Vanessa, Michael, Olivia, and David. They had been friends since they were kids and loved going on adventures together. One summer, they decided to take a camping trip deep into the forest. As they set up camp, they noticed that the forest seemed eerily quiet. There were no birds singing, no animals rustling in the bushes, nothing. But they shrugged it off and decided to explore the forest a bit before the sun went down. As they walked deeper into the forest, they started to feel like they were being watched. They would catch glimpses of shadows moving in the corner of their eyes. But when they turned to look, there was nothing there. They all laughed it off as their imagination and continued on. But as the sun began to set, they realized they had gotten lost. They tried to retrace their steps, but nothing looked familiar. They were starting to panic when they heard a faint whispering in the distance. They followed the sound, hoping it would lead them back to camp. As they got closer to the whispering, they realized it wasn't just one voice, it was multiple voices, all speaking at once. They couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was a language they had never heard before. They were terrified and didn't know what to do. Suddenly, they came upon an old, abandoned cabin in the middle of the forest. The whispering was coming from inside. Without thinking, they burst into the cabin and were confronted with a sight they would never forget. Inside, there were dozens of people, all of them with blank, expressionless faces, sitting around a large table. They were all whispering in unison, and the friends realized that they were all speaking the same language. The friends tried to run, but the people in the cabin seemed to come alive, chasing after them with a strange and terrifying energy. The friends were able to outrun them. Not long after, they realized that the forest seemed to be closing in on them. The trees were growing closer together, and the path they had taken to get to the cabin was now blocked by thick underbrush. They tried to find another way out, but every path they took seemed to lead them back to the cabin. They were trapped and didn't know what to do. They started to hear the whispering again, this time louder and more urgent. It was coming from all around them, and they couldn't tell where it was coming from. They spent the night huddled around the campfire, too scared to sleep. They knew they had to find a way out of the forest before morning, or they would be trapped there forever. Determined to escape the forest, as they walked, they began to notice that the trees were changing. The leaves were turning black, and the branches twisted and gnarled. The whispering grew louder and louder, until it was almost deafening. They could hear words now, and they were all in the same language as the people in the cabin. But they still couldn't understand what they were saying. As they walked, they started to see things in the shadows. Creatures that looked like they were made of darkness, following them through the forest. They were fast and silent, and the friends knew that if they were caught, they would be in serious trouble. Finally, after what felt like hours, they saw a glimmer of light through the trees. They knew they were close to the edge of the forest, and they pushed on with renewed energy. But just as they were about to break through the trees, they were confronted by a figure that seemed to be made of shadows. It was tall and thin, with long, twisted fingers and a face that was nothing but darkness. It spoke to them in the same language as the whispering, but this time they understood every word. It told them that they had trespassed on sacred ground, and that they would never leave the forest alive. The friends were paralyzed with fear, but they knew they had to run. They turned and sprinted towards the light, not looking back until they had broken through the trees and were back on the road. They were panting and sweating, their hearts pounding with fear. They had never been so scared in their lives. They looked back at the forest, but it was now just a dense wall of trees. They could see no sign of the cabin or the creatures that had chased them. But the whispering was still there. It was still calling out to them. They could hear it in their minds, even though it was no longer audible. It was a haunting, persistent sound that they knew they would never be able to escape. They decided to make a run for their car, which was parked a few miles away. It was their only hope of getting out of the forest and far away from the mysterious cabin and the creatures that lurked in the shadows. They ran as fast as they could, but their legs were weak and heavy, and they were still disoriented from getting lost. As they got closer to the car, they could see that something was wrong. The car was turned over on its side, with all its windows smashed. They could see that the inside of the car had been torn apart, and they knew that whatever had been chasing them had found it first. They were trapped, with no means of escape. They had no choice but to try and survive the night. They huddled together, trying to stay warm, and to keep the fear from overwhelming them. They knew that the creatures would come for them soon, and they had to be ready for whatever came next. As the night went on, they heard strange noises, rustling and scratching, coming from the darkness. They knew that the creatures were closing in, and that their time was running out. They decided to make a final stand and fight for their lives. They gathered whatever sticks and rocks they could find, and waited for the creatures to come. When they finally appeared, they were even more terrifying than they had imagined. They were twisted and deformed, with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. They seemed to be made of shadows and darkness, and they had no mercy. The friends fought with all their might, but they were no match for the creatures. They were dragged away into the darkness, never to be seen again. But the whispering remained, echoing through the forest, a reminder of the horror that had occurred there. The forest was now known as a place of death, and it was said that those who ventured in would never come out. And the whispers of the four friends would forever be heard in the depths of the forest, a haunting reminder of the terror that lurked in the shadows.